Now, in previous videos, I mentioned that I intend to add cooperative multiplayer to my fan remake of BioHazard Resident Evil 1. But I never explained in depth about why even to do that. First of all, I'll mention that I added a customizable multiplayer puzzle system that I bought from the Unreal Engine marketplace. So let's take a look at that. Now that I finished showing you that example, let's continue talking about why I want to implement cooperative multiplayer for this fan remake. Now, because that multiplayer puzzle system I bought is customizable, it makes it easier for me to transform the Arclay Mansion meta puzzle into a multiplayer one. Let's go into some technical history behind BioHazard Resident Evil 1. Capcom originally intended BioHazard Resident Evil 1 to be a multiplayer action adventure. But given the PlayStation 1 hardware limitations at the time, it wasn't practical to implement cooperative multiplayer for BioHazard Resident Evil 1 back then. Now, when I am revisiting Capcom's original intent to make BioHazard Resident Evil 1 a cooperative multiplayer action adventure experience, I'm not doing it for simply the sake of revisiting original intent, but in a way that enhances what's established to the franchise. If you take a look at promotional art concerning a variety of games in this franchise, you will notice that Capcom originally intended cooperative multiplayer you will notice in these promotional arts of player characters standing side by side. For example, Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield standing side by side in a promotional art of, say, the 2002 remake. In promotional art of the Deadly Silence addition to the Deadly Silence port of the original BioHazard Resident Evil 1, you'll notice Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine standing side by side. That's, of course, two examples I've thrown out there. The Arclay Mansion was designed as a meta puzzle by George Trevor. And George Trevor himself died while attempting to figure out this meta puzzle by himself. Even though the original Biohazard Resident Evil 1 and its 2002 remake were single player affairs, you will notice that solving the meta puzzle of the Arclay Mansion wasn't exactly a single character effort. That's because the Arclay Mansion meta puzzle was solved by a cooperative effort of the STARS, Special Tactics, and the Rescue Service team members employed by Raccoon Police Department. Another thing is that to do a remake of an action horror adventure game, you need to mutate the familiar into unfamiliar. You need to weaponize nostalgia of the source material game. Now, Biohazard Resident Evil 1 was remade once on Nintendo GameCube, but that's simply one generation gap of hardware after the original game premiered on PlayStation 1. Contrast that to the BioHazard 2 remake and BioHazard 3 remake, which were released in a 3 generation hardware gap after the original BioHazard Resident Evil 2 and 3 premiered on PlayStation 1. And while, yes, BioHazard Resident Evil 2 Remake was still a single player affair, and the same goes for that BioHazard 3 Remake, unless we're talking about the Biohazard Resistance subgame to the Biohazard 3 remake. The hardware gap is still relevant. This Biohazard Resident Evil 1 fan remake I'm working on is a rough draft to my ultimate vision for Biohazard Resident Evil 1 on more advanced hardware than not only PS1 hardware, but more advanced than GameCube hardware. Let's be honest here. Biohazard Resident Evil 1 has untapped potential for realization on more advanced hardware. Another thing is that Biohazard Resident Evil 1 has always been defined by a philosophical message. And what is that philosophical message, you ask? a message of sacrificing for the greater ideal of universal healthcare. And by adding cooperative multiplayer to BioHazard Resident Evil 1, that would actually accentuate the franchise's philosophical message. Now, I previously said about mutating the familiar into unfamiliar when you're remaking an action horror adventure game. Now, the BioHazard Resident Evil 1 remake of the GameCube era was a byproduct of hardware limitations almost as much as the source material game. Yes, it redesigned pre-existing areas of the Arclay mansion and added some new areas. But by adding a multiplayer puzzle system, I'm aiming to weaponize nostalgia of the 2002 remake. I'm not only aiming to redesign the Arclay mansion, and of course, expand and the environments of Biohazard Resident Evil 1, but in a way that will be unfamiliar to those who even played the 2002 remake. And the more advanced hardware we have now enables me to do exactly that. Now, I previously said this multiplayer puzzle system is customizable. So that means I'll be able to make unique puzzles of a multiplayer nature when redesigning the Arclay mansion and its contiguous environments. So the examples that I showed you for the multiplayer puzzle system, they're simply that. They're simply examples. They're simply for reference to what can be done. Thank you for watching and listening.